Hey everybody, well thanks for coming to see us today. This is a great topic, super fun. We have some great panelists here who I've gotten to know a couple times over the past 6 months or so. And we're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons and how it's used in education. And I can't think of a better group here. So I'm going to very briefly give these guys a super short intro, but then we'll come around and learn a little more about them and what they're doing. Right over here is Dan Rawson. He's an SVP at Wizards of the Coast, which makes Dungeons & Dragons, but I like to think of him as the head of D&D, which is possibly one of the coolest jobs in the universe to have. Shelley Mazanoble is a senior brand manager for Dungeons & Dragons, very involved in the education pursuits that's happening over there with the company. And over at the end is Cade Wells, really one of the most fascinating people I think I've ever talked to, who's an educator who has been using D&D in classrooms for more than 10 years and just has so much great insight and experience to share with us. I'm Dan Ackerman, tech and games journalist. You may know me from CNET and Gizmodo, and I'm very excited to be here with these guys. And we're going to tell you a lot about how you can use D&D in class in all kinds of different ways. But I want to start by talking to Dan a little bit, the other Dan a little bit. About your journey with D&D and how what you do impacts the specific education purposes of Dungeons & Dragons, and how you told me something really interesting about how we're kind of living through the legacy of the classic red box because more people than ever are playing D&D. A lot of that is thanks to your stewardship of the brand. So, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the introduction, the kind introduction. I'm super happy to be here and be able to share this program with folks. The Red Box, well, it's near and dear to my heart. When I was a little guy in the mid-'80s, my mother realized I was fascinated by Lord of the Rings, and she was out shopping one day and saw this incredible red box with a dragon and a fighter on the front. She thought, oh, Daniel will like that. So she brought it home, and it was off to the races. My brother, the kids down the street, it just really captured my imagination. And you mentioned earlier that I do have a cool job, and I got to tell you that 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and 10-year-old who was playing with that red box, the red box I still have today, he's pretty impressed with the job I have today. Pretty impressed. But yeah, D&D has a wonderful legacy. We're actually celebrating our golden anniversary this year, 50 years. And it's bigger than ever. In 2023, we had a fantastic movie. We had Baldur's Gate 3. We had wonderful books and adventures that were released. And now we have people playing 5th edition. More people now are playing 5th edition than have ever played in all the previous editions. And I'm just incredibly excited that, with D&D and how accessible it's been made over the last many years, we can also extend the benefits of D&D into schools. And I'm incredibly happy to sponsor this program and make it available to more and more people and to kids especially.
It's so interesting because as a kid growing up, going to public school in the Bronx in the 80s, that red box experience was part of my childhood too. Shelley, so tell me a little bit about what you do as a brand manager at D&D and how you got into the education end of it, which is just so fascinating.
Yeah, so I have worked at Wizards for quite a while, worked on all of our different brands from Magic the Gathering to Neopets to Duel Masters, and finally ended up on the D&D team where I belonged the whole time. But as a brand manager, I work with all of our cross-functional teams. We help promote the amazing books and the tools, the digital tools, everything that Dungeons & Dragons makes and available for fans, and tries to make those tools and books available to as many people as possible and really get people excited about Dungeons & Dragons. So I also have one of the coolest jobs in the world, I will say. The education part actually was inspired largely by the gentleman sitting next to me here. We met 10 years ago when we interviewed Cade on Dragon Talk, D&D's official podcast, because of the work that he was doing in schools using Dungeons & Dragons as a teaching tool. And I had heard about other teachers, like dabbling with D&D in the classroom, like maybe they were using the dice to, do math equations, or they were using it as a reward, like, hey, if we get all the work done this Friday, I'm gonna let you guys create a character or something. So I knew that there was potential, but after talking to Kate, it became clear that this is something that goes far beyond entertainment. There is something really powerful about Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, the math, reading, and writing, that's inherent to the game. You need all of those skills, but you don't even realize you're doing those skills because you're having fun playing a game. But there was the soft skills that we were learning that was also really beneficial for kids. Like, you are literally walking through a world as a different character, as a different person. You are interacting with people different from your own. And that's like one of the best ways to build empathy. But they're also using collaboration because this is a game where you have to work together. There's also listening, waiting your turn. That's very hard for a lot of kids to do. And those are the kids that become dungeon masters because it's always your turn. There's, it's just the analytical thinking, the strategic thinking. There was so much there. So I've spent probably the last decade, talking to Kate and working with Kate and trying to find ways in which we can kind of harness all of this amazing energy and get D&D into schools in a meaningful way, but also in a way in which teachers don't have to have had 30 years of experience being a dungeon master.
And then Kate Wells, of course, has spent the last 10 years, if not more, not just using D&D in classrooms, but really developing a lot of the methodology that a lot of teachers use now to get so much out of it. And we're here in Texas right now, and he's a former Texas teacher now in Sioux Falls. Kate, just tell us a little bit about how 10 years ago, how you got started taking your childhood love for this and finding a place for it in the classroom.
I became a teacher, and it was very clear to me as I was going through my pedagogy training that D&D had everything in it that they wanted us to learn to be educators. And so I kind of kept this under my hat a little bit for the first year of teaching, and then the second year, a teacher named Mr. West and I, he was also a kind of a war gamer guy. I said, would you start a D&D club with me? I think it's going to be big. I'm going to need your help. And that was my second year of teaching. And what I started to see almost immediately was that it was going to be this powerful tool of impact for kids. I mean, it was for me, so I knew what it could do, but giving it to kids, it's hard to train a whole bunch of kids at the same time, right? And so you develop systems by which you can do this. It was very, very clear to me from the very beginning that there was going to be little else that could do as much as Dungeons and Dragons could do for kids. And if it wasn't for my own life experience, I probably would never have known this, of course, right? But I, grew up in the middle of nowhere in South Dakota on a farm, and there was nothing to do. We had one coin-operated video game in the whole town, right? And I was Street Fighter 2, and I could beat it with a quarter. So playing D&D became a way it would become synonymous to me with friendship, right? And so realizing then, if that was the effect for me, why would it not be replicatable in a student body population? So our club started really, really large, and those kids excelled. If you can play D&D, you can pass the STAR test, right? So that's a pretty easy equation.
That's it. Now, over the past 10 or so years, how would you say, Cade, that your implementation has changed? Like, started off small, got bigger scale. How has it scaled for you over the past decade?
Well, now my kids play D&D every Friday. Every Friday, they play D&D at school during their class. And the measure that's come out of that reading data is phenomenal, okay? So, we tracked kids for a couple of years. I had them for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And their data is like this banana that tips up to the upper right hand. The rest of the class, the cohort is under here, and here's my kiddos' reading data. So I actually implemented it into class. It's part of my classroom English curriculum. You don't get to play D&D, you have to play D&D. And just like anything in education, there are kids who are quasi-resistant to it, right? For some kiddos, it's a little weird, and it's the opposite kid that doesn't like school, right? It's a character, a child who's always been really good at everything because they can fill in a blank and stuff. But when you give them 400 decisions that they need to make a character, it puts them back a little bit. But you're talking about one child in a classroom maybe. And so when you talk to teachers about this sort of thing, they're like, well, what about the kids who don't want to? And I'm like, well, what do you do with the kids who don't want to when you hand them a workbook? You know, like there's way more of those kids than there are of the one Suzuki who thinks that this is weird. And ultimately, you can, with the culture that gets built with this game, using that in class, in middle school. Remember middle school, y'all, okay? Like, remember middle school. It's weird. It's weird times. 7th grade especially is particularly awkward. And when you can bring kids together who don't normally interact within your classroom, give them a goal, give them a setting, they have an adventure to run, they all have powers and abilities, they are working with people on a regular basis, and that's one of the things, is using it with fidelity is really important. You can't just like, oh, we're going to play D&D one day. You have to run it, you know, relatively frequently. Every other week would probably work, but I like it every week. The culture in my classroom is so incredible because of this game, and the students don't really realize that, right? They don't realize why they've all of a sudden crossed the aisle to these friendships and things. So, you know, over the last 10 years, I have implemented D&D as a classroom instructional tool. I've also started teacher training programs. I don't know if you want to talk about that now. Through the University of Sioux Falls, I train teachers every spring. We make a group, and they learn how to play D&D, and by session 2, they're like, no wonder you do this. This is amazing. And so as a building culture, from my principal's perspective, it's amazing to have teachers get along that well. You go from a person that you see in the hallway, hey, good morning, whatever, you know, and then you play this game together, and after 2 sessions, you guys are friends, you know, and so that's really neat from a building culture perspective, from a principal or administrator.
And over the years, it's gone from you doing this sort of informally to Wizards now supporting education initiatives in a very formal, very structured way. And maybe, Shelley, you can tell us a little bit about the education kits and the resources available and how that sort of developed, and what role even you're working with Cade, you know, the influence that had.
Yeah, so I came across a company called Young Minds Inspired, and what they do is they create curriculum, standards-based curriculum for schools across the U.S. And I had sent them off an email trying to explain what I was trying to do. They immediately set up a meeting, and within 5 minutes of me explaining what Dungeons and Dragons was, they were like, stop. We get it. This is amazing. And so thankfully, they were able to turn out some really incredible curriculum activity sheets for students in grades 4 through 6, and then another batch for kids 6 through 8. And everything is free on their website. I don't know if you're familiar with YMI, but they're a great company. And so they designed all of this curriculum this started in 2022, I think. And this is, you know, we're still coming out of everything with COVID, so we really wanted to focus these activities on the social emotional learning, because D&D is great with that, working together and all that. So because this is new to us, we were, you know, we don't know what to expect. We hope that teachers will be excited to bring D&D into their classrooms. We hope that this is turnkey enough where they don't need to know how to play the game, they just need to know how to print out these activity sheets and hand them out. Everything was done for them. So we kind of had this informal goal of, let's say, like, maybe we could reach, you know, 100,000 families, students, teachers, and their families through this program. And after 3 months, we got metrics back from YMI, and the number was 4 million people we had reached. And even YMI was like, whoa. It's kind of big. So we realized, okay, there's definitely something happening here. Like the teachers came to this program with such enthusiasm and such passion, and they have fully supported it, so that we now have like 4 different batches of curriculum. It's like learning about puzzles and mazes with Dungeons and Dragons, but we're really secretly teaching you strategic thinking and how to analyze data. And we have a new batch that's coming out in just a few days, actually. It's called Storytelling with the Bard, and you're actually going to take on the role, you're going to become a Bard apprentice, but we're actually teaching you how to frame a story and how to structure it. And a lot of these activities have kids do their activities solo, but then we ask you to get together in a group and share what you're doing, and hey, why don't you role play that story? Or, you know, like, they're sort of being taught to be dungeon masters even without knowing fully what the role of a dungeon master is. So the curriculum launched, but alongside that, we relaunched our D&D club kits. So the after-school club kits are free. They still exist. This is a physical kit that if you are an organizer or just want to get a D&D club started in your school, your library, your enrichment center, we will send you everything you need to get that club going, including a really cool poster that you can advertise your club. I'm told that that is the favorite component in there. There's also a D&D Beyond educator license, so if you have access to D&D Beyond in your school, you can use that. It's a curated list of adventure content as well as access to the digital tools. You can get that for free as well. So it's just, we're continuing to provide tools and resources to just make it easy for teachers to get Dungeons and Dragons up and running and just get these kids exposed to the game in a meaningful way.
Yeah, now, Dan, I was going to ask you about how the goals of the education stuff and the traditional game that you run work together. But first, I would love to have a quick explanation for anyone who doesn't understand what D&D Beyond is.
What is D&D Beyond? D&D Beyond, well, it's a website. And it's a website that offers tools and services to help you get to fun faster. And it's also a place where you can gain access to the content, to the adventures, to the books. On that website now, we have more than 17 million registered users. It keeps growing every day. And we keep adding tools and features and facility to it so that people can actually do the thing they that they want to do, which is probably play, probably have fun with their friends. That's what D&D Beyond is.
Yeah, it's all about reducing friction, and I'm sure that's true for Shelley and Kate as well. You want to reduce the friction it takes to get kids into the game and get them playing. So when you're thinking about the big picture of Dungeons & Dragons as a brand, as a game, a lot of the stuff that Shelley and Kate talk about, the storytelling, the group dynamic, how much of that works into kind of your thinking, and is there anything that, like the education version of it or the education tools, they don't water down the game in any way. How does that kind of work its way into your thinking about where the brand is going, knowing that it's being used in all these other ways?
Right. The education program doesn't water down the game. What it does is it puts forward tenets of D&D that are critical, not only in the curriculum, but when you come to a D&D table and in life. We have a motto. It starts with a party, which is recognition that people come to a table with varied skills and varied experiences. In the D&D game, we represent those skills and experiences as classes. I'm a barbarian, I'm a wizard, I'm a bard. And through tenets like that, tenets of the game like that, we're super excited that children and folks using this curriculum get exposed to things that are meaningful in life. When you encounter people on the street, when you have to work with someone, those skills are incredibly important to develop. They also make D&D fun. I think what we want to accomplish at D&D is to make the game as accessible as it can be, to get it into the hands of more people, and to really meet people and fans and players where they are. I'm thrilled that children are embracing it in school. Those figures, are incredible. It's very exciting. And I'm thrilled that, we're meeting players in new mediums, like the digital medium on D&D Beyond, as well as the books that we've traditionally and will continue to create.
Yeah, there's something really interesting about working with, paper products and books and physical dice and physical miniatures when everyone is so focused on not just video games, but virtual reality and all these, and AI creating stuff for you rather than you having to do it yourself. I think it's really fascinating and optimistic. Makes me feel good about what kids are learning, how they're developing, that they get to go back and have some of the same experiences us vaguely Gen X-ish people did. And I want to pause for 1 second to say that we are going to answer some audience questions. And if you have a question, you should go to the SXSW EDU app and submit it, and it'll pop up here on the screen in front of us. And then near the end, we're going to take some time and scroll through some of these questions. And you can also upvote other people's questions to pop it to the top of our list so we can see it. So if you do want to talk about this topic, please throw your questions in because we would love to hear them. I was thinking about, Shelley, when you were describing the stuff you were working on, that you were also a parent who runs a club, and I would like to hear a little bit about your experience away from the office in the actual trenches.
Hey, Shelley, why don't you tell everybody why you started to run a D&D club at your kids' school?
Yes, Shelley, please tell us.
Because I'm very convincing. Because I spent a lot of time convincing other people to start D&D clubs at their schools. And then I found myself writing an email to my son's principal saying, "You should have a D&D club. Would you like one?" And she wrote back minutes later and was like, "Absolutely, we do. Talk to the PTA. Bye." And then I realized, oh my God, who's going to run this club? Is it me? I'm not a dungeon master. Well, I am now, I will say. Spoiler, I am. But I was terrified of being a dungeon master and don't think that it's something I would be very good at. And that part is actually sometimes true. However, I was so motivated and excited to start this club that I volunteered my husband to also be a dungeon master, and we thought, well, maybe we'll get like 10 kids. That'll be cool. But again, I'm really bad at predicting numbers, apparently, because it was like every kid in the 4th and 5th grade wanted to join this club, and until the point where like I had parents I don't even know finding my email, asking like, what do I have to do to get my kid to Storm Wreck Isle? Like, I've got to get him. My kid needs to be in the club. But the club has been really eye-opening for me because all of the stories that I've heard from Kate and from other educators, I'm seeing happening with my own eyes. In a much smaller scale, our club is in the 2nd year now. Now we've got 20 kids, and I've recruited a few more dungeon masters. But we have a kid who I didn't know was neurodivergent. She joined the club. She was my favorite person to play with. She was so creative and so fun and so engaging. She's the wizard, and she was given this magic item, and it was kind of silly. It made your like a plant grow really fast. But she was, when it's her turn, she's like, okay, guys, like, here's what we're going to do. I got a plan. And she was always so generous and funny. And when it was time to leave the Dragon's Rest, where they had just received their quest to go somewhere, she asked me if the people of Dragon's Rest had a farm. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, I'm sure they have a farm. And they have to self-sustain here. They're on an island. They probably grow all their food here. And she goes, well, I'm going to take my magic item. And she goes, bam! And she waited for me to respond. And I was like, oh, like all the crops they've just harvested. There's food for years and years. You've made them so happy. And then she just was like, okay, bye, and went off. I told her parents, I'm like, your daughter is so fun to play with. She's so engaging. She's so this. She's so bright. And they just looked at me. The mother actually got teary-eyed, and she was like, I can't believe you're seeing her. That's our daughter. Nobody sees this. Like in class, she's constantly in the principal's office. They call her disruptive. She can't focus. She can't sit still. But I can't believe that you see her for who she is. But when she's playing D&D and she's playing this amazing character, she is able to just relax and be herself. And there's another kid that was extremely shy, painfully shy. That kid is now a dungeon master, like literally ripped the adventure out of my hands. She was like, I'm just gonna do it. Like, okay, you're off and running. And then finally, this year, a child joined the D&D club, a 3rd grader, and she has selective mutism. And if you're not familiar with selective mutism, as I wasn't, it's an anxiety disorder in which the person has a hard time speaking in social situations. Now, if any of you have played Dungeons and Dragons, you may be thinking, don't you talk a lot when you play D&D? You do. It's a role-playing, it's a storytelling game. And I made sure her parents understood, there's the possibility that there's a lot of talking in this game, and she might be asked questions. And they said, we know, and she knows. She's seen people play D&D, and she wants to play Dungeons & Dragons. So great. They gave me a great tip, which I think is a great tip for anyone who's new to D&D. When it's your turn, and you're asking, what do you want to do? limit their choices. Say, do you want to attack the troll or do you want to run away? And the answer will always be attack the troll when you're playing with kids. There is no other choice. So with her, I absolutely did that. She shows up every day prepared. She is engaged. She is watching everybody. She is laughing at all the inside jokes. And there was one point in our adventure where the kids were asked they had to solve a puzzle. And if they solved the puzzle correctly, then Bahamut, the god of good dragons, was going to bless them all, and they were going to get this amazing power. But they had to translate something into Draconic, which is the language of dragons, and then they had to speak the word out loud. While the other kids were like, oh, I don't know, like trying to figure out how to solve it, and she was off just, scratching things off on a piece of paper. She's the only one that remembered. I had given them a handout at the beginning of this adventure that was kind of a cheat sheet. But she went through and she was translating word for word, and then in the midst of everybody talking and laughing, and it's like, it's 9 and 10-year-olds, I hear this voice just come up and say this word in Draconic, of all things. And everybody just stopped and looked at her, and she repeated it again. And I said, that's the word. You solved the puzzle. Nobody has ever, I got to play Bahamut. Nobody has ever solved my puzzle before. And she was so proud, beaming about that. And the other kids were like, yeah, good job, Betty. Thank you. Oh, that's great. Okay, what do we get? What's our power? What do we get? And since then, I've noticed a lot more confidence in her, and that there are times even when I do not give her 2 choices that she likes. She might go, neither. I'm like, okay, we're doing something else here. Her character can talk to animals. Well, when it's time to speak to the baby dragon that the party has adopted, she speaks to the baby dragon. She improvs a conversation with a baby dragon. And a lot of that is because I know a lot of therapists use D&D in their practice for this very reason. It isn't her. It's not her or 9-year-old Betty that's talking to a room full of people. It's her character, who is named Fang, the fighter, who is communicating with a baby dragon to try to get that baby dragon to scream really loud and call its mother, so that the mother will break through the ice caves that they're all trapped in, and then they'll get out of it. And by the way, teachers will appreciate this. They all decided to give the baby dragon tacos, because everyone knows dragons love tacos.
Love tacos, yeah.
And even though there aren't really tacos in D&D, part of your job as a dungeon master is yes and there are tacos, and there is in fact spicy salsa, and the plan worked. So it's the incredible things like that you get to see, and I highly recommend start a D&D club. Just feel good about yourself every week.
That's just incredible emergent storytelling from it. Although I do like the idea of trying to solve every problem by making plants grow really fast. I feel like you could come up with some good challenges for that. Cade, Shelley brought up something really interesting about some kids want to be players and some kids want to be dungeon masters, although the latter is a little more difficult, because I assume in your classes and in your programs, you want the kids to take on all the roles, including being the players and the dungeon masters. How do you basically get someone ready to take on that larger role with the critical thinking and getting everyone else to work together, being kind of the group leader? Do you identify those people early, or do they have to show that they can do it?
Yeah, as a teacher, I have to identify my potential dungeon masters in about 2 weeks. So you're looking at, they're all making characters, and so you can kind of see the kids that are really getting it really fast. And they're usually gamers, they're usually video gamers, they get the system right away, but it also takes a certain cognitive individual, and we're talking about 12 and 13-year-olds, y'all, okay? So you're looking for a very specific person. I need 4 of them usually. Finding 4 capable dungeon masters who have never played D&D before in a 7th grade classroom is relatively difficult. How do you train them? I train them after school for about 4 weeks. Once a week, they play with me the campaign or quest that they will run with their peers. So they are literally running the same thing that they will run, they're running it with me as a player, and then they'll run it as a dungeon master. Yes, my kids run everything. Besides my training, the dungeon master, it is very critical that they run the game by themselves. And all y'all know the Charlotte Danielson framework. It checks every box. My principal will come in on a Friday because he knows we're playing D&D, because he knows that it checks literally every box. And I'm so glad that we use that framework in South Dakota, because I got used to it here in Texas and I really, really loved it. The kids do everything. They set it up, they tear it down, they play it, they prepare for it, they level up their characters. Everything that they do when they play the game, they do it. And that's scores of 4 throughout the Danielson framework. And so I find that very compelling and from an educational point of view.
And what extra skills do you think students get out of being in that dungeon master role? How does
Oh
that
my, okay, this is,
differentiate
the dungeon masters, man. Sorry about that. They start as little mousy children because they're really intellectual, right? And they're not real good at like crossing the aisle and talking to all kinds of random people. And by the time they do this for a couple of years, even in my 7th grade cohort, now I'm thinking of a kid, and he wouldn't talk to anybody. And they become like socialites almost. They're almost like, I won't say rock stars, but they like become sort of like a quarterback in a way, okay? So here's this kid, these kids who would never rise in athletics necessarily, not that they won't, because I have athlete DMs as well. So, but they become so confident. They can manage people. They're able to talk to anybody. And so you'll have a really shy kid. Now, one of my female dungeon masters, one of the greatest people I may have ever known, goes around the lunchroom now after she's done eating lunch and plops down at a table just to visit with all the people in her cohort. This would have been something that would not have happened otherwise. So these stories perpetuate and repeat over and over and over and over again.
That's really interesting, especially about kind of the public presentation and public speaking part of it. We know that everyone says that's one of everyone's greatest fears is public speaking. Obviously not for us because we're up here on this panel talking about this, but especially giving kids in the 7th grade, roughly thereabouts, who may not have a lot of experience and probably have a lot of apprehension about this, that ability to go out and do it and giving them a framework for doing it, I think is really fascinating. I want to stick with the Dungeon Master thing for a second. And Dan, tell me a little bit about the kind of ongoing development of the Dungeon Master's Guide, because the kids in Kate's classes are using, the same guide as everybody else. And I know there's is there a new version being worked on? I think we talked about this a little bit. Tell me a little bit about the development of that, because it's such a key part of this.
There is a new version coming, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. But even before I do, what I wanted to add to this conversation that's happening right now is one of the things I love about kids playing D&D is they get it. Like, they're generally not afraid. Like, they jump in, and the most important Dungeon Master rule is one that comes so naturally to them, and that's the rule of cool. And so, just getting in there and facilitating that communal storytelling, if it's fun, that's what you want to do. Dungeons & Dragons does provide a framework. It does provide mechanics and settings and context to have that fun. But I just love watching kids, really get into it. Okay, but you asked me a specific question, and it's a question I do want to answer. And I'm going to do it with a little bit of context. We talked a little bit about the red box. When I was a kid, that was my experience, and no one taught me how to be a dungeon master. I just jumped in with my friends and my brother. For years, the content that's been created for Dungeons & Dragons has done, I would say, not a great job of kind of teaching how to be a dungeon master. We're fixing that. So we have 3 books. We call them the core rule books: the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master Guide, and the Monster Manual. All of those are being updated and refreshed. We're in 5th edition now. 5th edition was first released in 2014. It's been 10 years. We've learned a lot. And we're taking all of those lessons and applying them to an update that we're releasing starting in this year. The Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide in particular will come out in the second half of this year. And the Dungeon Master Guide is completely reimagined. Instead of it being an arcane reference source that you have to study for hours and hours to unlock its mysteries, it actually teaches you how to be a dungeon master. The team is doing a fantastic job of really asking the first order questions about how to approach teaching someone how to be a dungeon master. And that's what the Dungeon Master's Guide is going to be. It's going to be this fantastic educational guide, resource for training you how to facilitate fun and let the rule of cool reign supreme.
I really like that idea of kind of providing more onboarding for that job of being the dungeon master. Because you're right, it can be intimidating, and I know that Kate and others sometimes, you have to find the right people to do it, and it's not as easy as just everybody start playing. I really like the point you made about making it cool and making it fun, because so much of what people do in video games, they end up kind of min-maxing it and just trying to like optimize their build and kind of, find the loopholes in the game just to get the highest score, and that takes, I think, some of the creativity and fun and storytelling out of it. But in Dungeons and Dragons, having a good time is the goal. That's the end game, whether you win, whether you get eaten by a dragon, whether you use your magic wand to make all the plants grow in the town. As long as you're having a good time, you're winning, and it's not as, even though it's very stat-based, it's not as score-based as video games are, and I think that's a huge difference. Because we're here at the EDU conference part of South by Southwest, I want to talk to Kate a little bit about some of the more specific data that you have gotten over the years, the improvements you've seen in students who play. I want to talk a little bit about how it can help kids with ADHD and other issues. I find that some of the most fascinating stuff, and I would love to hear just a little bit of what you've learned over the years.
Okay, so if we go back to H-Town, in my 4th year of teaching, I became department chair of English, and I asked my teachers to identify a kid in their reading class that could benefit from Dungeons and Dragons. They did. They pulled, I think I had four kids that were there constantly. In Title I, kids move a lot, and so I had 4 core kids. They were hurt, in different ways. Josue had really pretty serious autism. He was a fun kid and generally very, very good, but couldn't really communicate, couldn't reach out. He was locked inside of himself as the disability dictates. We had Devin was hyperactivity defiant disorder, okay, squirrely little guy, but also really fun to kind of be around. He just was always getting in trouble because he could never relax. We had Prince, who was seriously dyslexic to the point where he could barely read. His reading endurance was so low that he'd get to sentence number 2 and he'd be out of gas. And then Victor suffered from trauma because of losing his family in Honduras. So I'm going to isolate them each one a little bit here. Princeton wanted to be a wizard. He couldn't read, and he wanted to be a wizard. And I was like, dude, how about a barbarian? What about a rogue? Maybe a fighter or something like that. And he's like, no, Mr. Wells, I'm gonna be a wizard. Okay, buddy, okay. So I started to show him the process by which to become a wizard. He starts writing down all of his spells in a journal, okay? Devin joined us shortly after that, and he wanted to be a bard, which made sense for Devin because he is a bard. And he was like, I want to cast a spell magic, but I don't really know what it does. And Princeton, a month previous, would not be able to do this, flips over in his journal to the spell magic, which he had, and he reads it out loud verbatim, okay? This kid couldn't read before, and so a month of D&D and studying this and being engaged in it and having the community made that a possibility for him, which I was even very skeptical. Devin was able to relax because he was engaged in the activity that we were doing. There was no reason to be defiant, and if he was, he could do it through his character, okay? So again, the extension. Josue began to be a regular child. His autistic symptoms minimized, and he started to joke around in class, and some of his teachers were like, yeah, it's not awesome, but we're really glad to see him fitting in and stuff. It helped him come out of his shell, because, and I've learned this with other autistic children as well. I've taught many of them over the years. It's something about the extension of self into a third person, so that it's not really them. So a lot of autism, they don't meet your eyes, right? And well, with a character, you don't have to, and that character is them, but it's not. And so it gives them the ability to express themselves, and slowly but surely, the friendships around the table for an autistic child are amazing, right? All of a sudden, this kid who had trouble communicating has these D&D friends, and they last, anybody who's ever played this game knows that the relationships you make around a gaming table, they last forever. They last forever. Victor's parents were put on their knees, and he was set next to them, and they were killed with a machete in Honduras, and they told him, you're next, and they stopped and said, this is our farm, now leave. And Victor left Honduras and made it all the way to Houston to live with his aunt and his uncle. And he was completely disengaged in school. He didn't want to do anything. I can't imagine why, right? Just the trauma that would have created for any of us is just hard for me to wrap my head around. And I was, during the creation phase of their characters, I was helping them a great deal, but Victor didn't need help. He would hold up his character sheet and say, Mr. Wells, is this right? And he was accurate every single time. So because of his trauma, he was disengaged. When the teachers got him to write something, he would say, I want to go to Honduras and die, like back at my farm. And he started to really, smile, okay? Smiling for Victor was a big deal. His aide came up to me a couple of days after, it was probably about 2 weeks after we'd started, because we played 3 times a week. I got to pull them pretty impressively, right? And I was watching this growth just happen almost immeasurably. And his aide came up to me and she said, what did you do to Victor? And she was a really kind of a scary lady, Mrs. Jones, and I could never tell how she actually felt because her face was always the same. And I said, I don't know, I've been teaching him this game, it was a hard day. And she puts her hand on me and she smiles. She says, he's a changed boy. He participates, raises his hand, doesn't sleep in class. And she said the one amazing thing is that he goes out of his way to help all these other kids all the time. And it was almost like the model that I was creating for him, he wanted to perpetuate that in his life. And so Victor became this helpful person. I don't know where he is today. I don't know, he's probably 22, I would guess, 21, something like that. And that's just the broad stroke of a long time ago. I've taught a lot of kids with ADHD and autism and things like that, and I can tell you the game works for literally everybody. I have a counselor right now. Our school counselor is in my teacher training session, and her child is autistic, and she's like, I'm really eager to share this with him because I think this is really going to help him based upon what she's learning by playing the game with us teachers. So these really amazing loops keep happening. I hope I hit your question. Is that good enough for you?
Yeah, but I'm also really interested. You mentioned ADHD a little bit at the end, and as the parent of a 7th grader right now, that's something we hear about all the time. And I would love to hear a little bit about how specifically the game helps them and what skills it can help build for them. I
think it just actually teaches them patience and the compulsion element of ADHD. So you actually have to focus in order to be able to play, which is activating different parts of your brain. And so a child with ADHD often has to come down from space in order to answer your question or whatever. It's not necessarily that they're like super hyper. It's like their brain could be the hyper thing that's off in space, right? Well, D&D allows you to do that anyway, but you have the context by which to make your brain actually do something with being out in outer space. So I think it's actually just the inherent nature of the game itself and the need to understand, which really occupies your mind. And then that's just character creation stuff, right? Then during gameplay, it's, the hyperactivity kid, he's going to be like hyper, and that's still going to be a thing, but he has these people to interact with, and you also then have other people to say, hey, bro, you got to chill out a little bit, just take a second and, let us play too. And so you end up with a kind of a family environment that really helps them belong, and all of a sudden they're not the weird kid who's disrupting things all the time.
Do you find you have to sometimes make some accessibility adjustments to the game for specific students?
Brother, not really. I mean, yes, I have color-coded character sheets so that when they're learning, I can say attacks, red box, skills, blue box, green box. And we just use colored pencils to do that. That's an accessibility thing. I'll help, as teachers should. Hey, you can't find this? Let me show you. But the reality is once you help with the accommodation a couple of times, they don't really want your help anymore. They want to flip through and look at the graphs and charts and pictures and everything. They want to do it on their own, which is called gradual release, which all y'all know. And it's easier than you think and harder than you would expect at the same time. But the ADHD piece, I know that this is it's going to become worse before it's better in our society for ADHD, given media and technology and stuff. I think the game slows them down. They have to understand it in order to play, and they're excited about the idea of playing, and so they're willing to instill some patience where, a kid with ADD can play video games, no problem, right? Because it's giving them the feedback that they desire. And so I think D&D facilitates that same thing, but it also teaches them how to be patient and wait your turn, and they because they're looking at their peers' faces when they're playing. I need to recognize they all have time to play as well. And so I think there's lots of different things that help them with their problem.
Yeah, Shelley, do you do anything specific in terms of the educational materials that you work on, in terms of accessibility, or in terms of pitching it specifically for kids with educational issues?
So I rely a lot on experts like Cade to offer advice. We have done a lot of webinars with people, with educators that have a lot of experience in running D&D in their classroom that can give great advice. You can find all of that on our website under educator resources. The curriculum that we create for the classroom is, again, it is meant to be just no information about D&D. You don't need to know anything. So it's really just kind of it's able to be tailored and meet the kids where they are. It's just like these are, to them, like really fun activity sheets. I'm creating a map. But the teacher can dial it up, dial it down as much as they need to. So I think the curriculum is a really good place to start if you've got students that are from 3rd grade to 8th grade.
And Dan, I feel like you're already working on accessibility with the new sort of onboarding and the new Dungeon Master's Guide and the new Player's Handbook. How much of that thought process goes into developing new tools for the game, and then how do you carry that over into other tools people may need for accessibility, like virtual tabletop stuff, which I think is really interesting and can really bring in people who might, for whatever reason, not be able to be there in person with paper and with dice. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's great questions. Certainly, in the physical book, there are improvements that we're making, like bigger font, the organization, et cetera, and that does something for folks, and we're certainly pursuing it. I do think the digital medium gives us some really significant opportunities to meet accessibility needs, and much like Shelley mentioned, we do rely on outside experts to help steer us in that. Take, for example, the official VTT. Internally, we call it Project Sigil. But it's going to be this beautifully rendered 3D virtual tabletop that is highly toyetic. It'll feel like, coming to a table that someone has added meticulously crafted terrain and miniatures to. And through that digital medium, I think there are going to be some incredible opportunities for us to allow everyone to get to the fun faster, including things like presenting information contextually. Instead of having to do 3 or 4 hours of prep work to run your campaign, is there a way that I can show up to the game as a dungeon master with my players and be just as surprised about what I find there, and not have to do all that prep work, have all of that information come at the right moment in the right way, with all the adjustments that you would want to make it as accessible as possible. We're really excited about the future.
Yeah, I really love stuff like that, and we've all talked a little bit about games like Baldur's Gate 3, which are based on Dungeons & Dragons, and also have that cooperative playability with the game acting as the Dungeon Master, and everyone can just be a player. And, Cade, you and I have talked about 3D printing for miniatures and scenery and things like that, and how this can bring in maker culture at the same time, which is another great way to get kids interested. But we're running low on time here. I want to get to some questions from the audience, but first, Cade has a couple of former students in the audience today.
Are you guys out there?
He would love to say hi, too.
Halt the Wizard, Jose.
And have him come up here just for a second to say hi.
Come here, guys.
Come on up here, guys.
Be quick about it. We're running out of time.
And tell us real quick, when did you teach these guys?
So these nerds right here were in my very first Dungeons & Dragons club. These guys were the data that I collected when I went to the European Literacy Conference.
It's good to see you again.
These guys were the origin story of Dungeons & Dragons in the classroom. I'm so glad you're here, you guys. So glad. JC here was a ranger, a zombie-slaying ranger who waited till the very last minute when all the townsfolk had finally evacuated. He wasn't going to evacuate. He was going to go down with the ship. And Halt the Wizard was probably hiding in a bush somewhere, blasting, the zombies from a distance, remiss that his friend was going to die in the basement. I love you guys. I'm so glad that you're here.
It was wonderful to watch.
Anything you want to say?
Not too much. Y'all actually said pretty much all of what I had planned to say up here. It was rather impressive.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
You guys, I'm glad you're here. We'll hang out in a little bit. So that's the origin story. They were a couple of the kids that were in club, and what we saw happen, they've been friends for 10 years. They met in D&D club, I mean, essentially. And so the power that the game has is, there's some of these questions I've been looking at, like beyond the test scores, right? What qualitative outcomes? That's the qualitative outcome is friendship. D&D and friendship are synonymous in my life, and any students that I've ever had that kept playing the game would say the very same thing. The teachers that I mentioned during training, it's like you go from hey in the hallway to like, oh bro, what you did yesterday was so amazing, and it brings these people together in this way that nothing else I've ever seen in my entire life can do.
And these carry over, as they leave middle school and go into high school, and usually that's where
starting
you lose a lot of these friendships.
Starting in middle school is the perfect place because that gives you all of high school and all of college. Your whole rest of your life is there. The skills and the friendships and the concepts, they will follow you from age 12 all the way through your life, whether you keep playing or not. You're never going to not have a friend when you see a player's handbook sitting on a coffee table, It's like, oh, dude, we had this crazy teacher that's stuffing things, right?
That's great. I'm looking over some of the audience questions here, and if you have a question, you still have a few minutes to type it into the SXSW EDU app and throw it up at us. But I like the one about, can you share any strategies that you've developed to support parents in understanding and embracing the role of RPG-based learning if they're not familiar with it?
If
they were perhaps not nerds as children as we all were.
It comes up. It's actually their kids are coming home really happy, and like the stigma behind D&D has legitimately gone away. Thank God. I mean, it should have a long time ago, but it's pretty much gone. And what I'm seeing today is actually parents are really excited because they played it back in the day. So that's more common than ever before, where a kid's like, oh, my dad told me they played D&D, and like I had no idea. I mean, so it's sort of a surprise for the kids sometimes. Strategies that work if you're having trouble. Okay, so the kids' scores are going to go up. They're going to come home happy. That's going to happen. If they're playing with fidelity, those two things are going to happen, okay? If you have resistance from a parent, you can have them come in and give them the player's handbook and a character sheet and say, just take a look at this. It'll take 5 minutes. They're going to be like, oh, okay. And then show them some gameplay, like this is what they do. They sit around and they talk and they listen and they wait their turn and they roll some dice. And so the strategies, the resources, it's really pretty basic. It's teacher stuff. It's like talk to them, explain it to them, show them. Showing them is really the easiest way to go. It really is.
The school curriculum also does have a letter for parents that the teacher can print out and send home with the students that's like, hey, your kids are doing really exciting activities based on Dungeons and Dragons. Here's an overview of the game. Here's how we're using it. And here's where to go for more information.
Do you get a lot of feedback from parents? Either Shelley or Kay, do you guys get a lot of feedback from parents?
Most of my feedback is positive. They're very excited, and they actually like, hey, can I run a game? Can I come in for club? I mean, that happens. The timing doesn't work out great because we run our club at like 3:04 to 4:30, right? Parents are at work, but parents, especially that used to play that like kind of fell away, they're like, oh man, I can't wait to share this with my daughter. I mean, or my son, and this year in 7th grade, I want to say I have like 7 or 8 kids whose parents grew up playing D&D, and they didn't necessarily know that their parents played D&D.
I wonder if people go and dig out their old monster manuals and their
they
old
do.
dungeon
A kid brought them in,
Yes.
dude.
vintage.
Dan, a kid brought him in from his dad. He brought in his white monsters manual from 2nd edition advanced, and I think the Book of Artifacts or something. And he says, my dad wanted you to have these for the class. I don't know if you can use them. I delved through the Book of Artifacts. That is a cool book.
Then you have to go back and explain to the parents that there's not basic and AD&D anymore. It's all.
I had a kid show up with his dad's original character sheet to play. It was a 3rd level character, and we were playing 1st level, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, but we're 1st level. So he goes, okay.
You can nerf
and he
him a
just
little bit.
erased 3 and wrote a 1. And I'm like, all right.
So a question we got is, with such a wide array of abilities basically needed, how long does it take to get kids set up to the point where they can run the games?
Yeah, these are really good questions, by the way. I appreciate you. Okay, so with a wide array of abilities, it takes my kids probably about 2 months before you can really see them actually getting it. Keeping in mind we play on Fridays, right? So that's 8 sessions. DMs get frustrated because they're like, Mr. Wells, they don't know what they're doing, and it's so difficult for me to know everything that they're supposed to be able to do, and I don't know what to do. And I'm like, dude, just be patient. And I tell them, if you're having fun, it's going to be fine. Like if you're having fun, you're doing it right. So calm down. And then the DMs will come to me after a couple of months and they're like, man, Mr. Wells, this is so much more fun now that they know what they're doing. So it takes a while. So guys, when I started this back in the day, I tried it in class, and what I saw I felt was a disaster in class with the large numbers of kids. If I did the same thing today with that large of a class, which I actually have just done, it's not a disaster. You just have to know what you're looking at. It looks like organized chaos and sometimes not so organized. But the kids were all smiling in this, and all I could get in my head at this point in Houston was, if an administrator walks in right now and sees this, I'm probably in trouble because it looks like a mess. But now that I know what I know, it wasn't a mess. They were actually trying their very best with fidelity to play this game that I was introducing them to, and I kind of wish I would have stuck with it, but it became, I got afraid, and then I said, well, maybe club is the way to start. And then once I saw what that was able to do, of course, then that's where the Friday sessions started.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
A really quick shout out. We created an intro-friendly adventure called Peril in Pinebrook, and you can find that on D&D Beyond. And it is an amazing teaching tool, not just for kids, for their families, for a dungeon master. It teaches you how to DM as you're playing it, and it teaches you how to teach people how to play it. So I highly recommend. It comes with character sheets and everything you need. I highly recommend you start there. And then the other thing is just of what Cade said. It's okay if they don't know how to play or if they're playing it wrong. They are going to get excited enough about it to figure out the rules and just keep learning about it. But the important thing is just let them go. Let them just have fun and see what happens.
You know, we got a question there about, well, actually, Katie, you were pointing at one, so tell me which question
As the
you're pointing
district leader,
at.
can you talk more about how this can support math and literacy?
That was exactly the question I was about to ask you, too.
Yes, I have a way of measuring impact, and so do you. If you're from Texas, it's the STAR test. For me, it's called NWEA, and they take it like 3 times a year. That's great data because it shows 3 different points along the course of a year. But the math and literacy, okay, so the math is basic, but it's recursive. I actually am conferencing with a teacher from Connecticut who uses D&D in his senior statistics class on Fridays. And of course, D&D is statistics, right? And so that makes perfect sense. The math, I'm really bad at math, and I wonder how bad I would be at math if it wasn't for D&D, because you're always using basic math, but at the same time, you're learning to put these numbers together very quickly, which is a synaptic path in your brain, which means then all of a sudden the myelin sheath of that little part that was unused gets more used, right? And so all of a sudden information becomes easier. Literacy. The game is literally built on literacy, okay? So the player's handbook is 300 pages. The Dungeon Master's Guide is 300 pages. The Monster's Manual is probably like 370 pages, okay? The game is literacy, and if you get a kid hooked, like they do, they will keep reading because there's books and books and books and books and books for days and days and days, and they're written at like a 1400 Lexile, which is right around like freshman in college, sophomore in college reading level. And if you can get a 12 and 13-year-old kid to do that in middle school, they're going to crush this life.
Hey,
Thank you, administrators, for the question. That's a really good question.
we got a great question here, which is, I think, Shelley, how do we find the kits to get our club started in our school? What's the easiest way for people to just find them quickly?
The easiest, I'm going to give you a URL that you can go to, and it's a little bit long, I'm sorry. But you have to go to dnd.wizards.com/resources/educators. I'm sorry that it's so long, but that is where you'll find everything, our curriculum, all the webinars I mentioned, and how to get your free kit.
Awesome, thank you. And that seems like a fantastic note to wrap up on since we're in our last 45 seconds. I really want to thank you guys. It's been so great getting to know you, both at this talk and previous talks that we've done. Cade, Shelley, Dan, you guys are taking something that was a big part of my childhood and making it even more relevant now to me, now that I'm a parent as well. And I think it's just fantastic. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Let's have a hand for this great panel here.